So sourcing and sustainability has been something that, has been really important to me, not just working in the industry. And I saw just the waste happening, even on the retail level, and then, learning more about the production side of it. So I am going to share my screen just so you guys have something visual to look at while I'm chatting for a minute. So my background obviously is in fashion merchandising, and I really spent a lot of time on the retail side. But a couple years ago, my husband's best friend, actually, we were out somewhere and he said, I want to start a clothing company. Let's do this. And I said, okay. But if I do it, it's going to be, focused on recycling, focused on sustainability. I'm not just going to produce a t-shirt line. That doesn't make sense to me. So he said, okay, no problem. So we enlisted somebody else involved with it, who is subsequently not part of it anymore, but we started Goofy Foot USA. And this is our brand now. And something that, kind of ties back into what we're going to talk about with COVID is, being a small brand, we were definitely extremely impacted by COVID. Our big season, of course, at the Jersey Shore is the summer, right? It's festivals, it's all these different places, and they didn't happen this year. So we had no source of revenue stream other than online. So it's been an adjustment for us, even in a small level. And as we kind of chat today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the whole industry as a whole, because I think sometimes we're sitting at home and we're thinking, oh, this is great. I'm saving so much money. I'm wearing sweatpants every day and maybe a shirt for my Zoom calls, but that's it. And this is great. But what impact does that have long term, and all kind of the domino effect that happens. So this is my brand. I won't go too much into it. You've heard enough about it. But it's t-shirts, hoodies, things like that we started. And, we're kind of evolving because we do sell in a store in Atlantic City, but they were closed with COVID. So that was another area that, we're kind of, rechecking ourselves for the year. So thinking where we want to go and what direction we want to be, and what it's going to look like next summer too. So when we talk about sustainability, I see some of my students on here. So you hear me talk about this all the time. But sustainability, the actual definition is, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. So, having 3 kids, this is something that's really prevalent to me now, because I think of what is it going to be like in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and it's important to them. They get involved in it and they want to talk about it, and they get upset when a plastic water bottle's, in the river when we're hiking or doing different things. So they're really passionate about it. But the 3 main pillars for sustainability is you're looking at economic impacts, of course, right? Because at the end of the day, a business has to be profitable. We can do some great things and have great ideas, but if we're not making money, we can't employ, right, the people that work for our company. So economic, environmental, right? What are our impacts on, what we're producing, and, how does that look full circle? Once we put, when somebody buys one of my garments, what happens after that, right? What does that look like when they wash it, when they, want to get rid of it at some point? How does that impact our world that we're living in? And then of course, social, right? So how does it affect our communities long-term? And just to make it simple, it's people, planets, and profits. So sustainability, and again, I have a short amount of time. I could talk about this for many hours, so I tried to streamline it a little bit for you all. But just to think about the fashion industry as a whole, it's 1.7 trillion US dollars. That's the global value of the fashion industry. So we're here to stay, right? 60 to 75 million people, or essentially 1 out of 6 people across the world, are employed in some way by the fashion industry. And just a side note, 75% of these employees are female. So thinking of our garment production, our textile factories, it's primarily females that are working in those industries. So if you think 60 to 75 million, I'm not a math major, but what is that, a fifth, a quarter of the United States population, if we looked at that. So it's a lot of people. And COVID has really impacted this. And I'll go through a little bit of that in a minute. So the world consumes about $80 billion or 80 billion items of new clothing each year. That's a 400% increase from 20 years ago. Talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents. They will tell you we buy much more than we ever did. I think about when I was younger and it was special to get things on my birthday and on Christmas, right? That was kind of, and back to school. Those were the only 3 times a year I got new clothes. Now, because it's so cheap, we're able to buy things all of the time. So to kind of put this in perspective, in the 80s, people were buying about 12 items a year, 12 new clothing items a year. Does anybody want to venture to guess? And you can, shout out or put it in the chat how many items a year we buy now? Average.
1,000?
100.
Oh, not that bad. So this is going to be good news for you. 64. So, and that's average. So you might buy 150 items, but somebody else might buy 3. So these are new items, not, thrift or anything like that. These are newly produced items. The fashion industry really produces about 20 items per person across the world. So think about that, right? They're just automatically producing enough that each person would buy 20 items. But that's not really what we're buying, right? And not in many countries, right? And these are brand new garments. So there's a lot of consumption happening. How many pounds of clothing do you think goes to landfill per American citizen?
60.
60, that's pretty close. A little higher. So it's about
here, 70.
70, a little higher.
Myrna wrote in the chat 70.
Okay. So it's 86 pounds. My 9-year-old.
Wow. Holly said 90 in the chat,
yes,
so she's very close.
She gets it. So it's about 86 pounds of clothing that we just throw to the landfill. That doesn't go to ThredUp, it doesn't go to thrift shops, it doesn't go to Goodwill or any of these other places. That's just what ends up in the landfill. So that's a little frightening, right? And most of these clothes, actually the majority, are never going to decompose because they're made of synthetic fibers. So when I usually do some of these presentations, I focus more on the fiber piece, but I'm trying to keep it into COVID and social justice today. But these synthetic fibers will never decompose. And for example, things like polyester, spandex, nylon, they take about 342 million gallons of oil to produce every year. And 60% of all garments have polyester in them. Polyester is like a recycled water bottle. That's really what you can do with polyester, right? So a lot of polyester you might see now could be recycled water bottles, which is something that we do. And a lot of other brands are doing now too. But it's also, try to think of, it emits 2 to 3 times more carbon than cotton, polyester does. So that's carbon obviously being emitted into the atmosphere. And this is part of our global warming, and it all kind of goes into our carbon footprint too. So obviously natural fibers are something that we're really promoting if you're going to consume a lot of items. But in a minute, I'll show you, consuming a lot of items, whether they be natural fibers or synthetic, it's probably not a good way to go, right? So unfortunately, fast fashion has made it easy. You can go to H&M, buy a $10 shirt. Why not? Buy it in 3 colors. Why not, right? It's so cheap. I always say in my class, like, my mother sends me so many things she'll go to Walmart or something and she'll buy my son 10 $1 t-shirts. And I tell her, he doesn't need 10 t-shirts. She said, but they're $1. Who cares? And I'm like, Mom, do you understand what impact? And they're all polyester and they're all, synthetic fibers. So, these are things that, but she comes from, well, why not? It's cheap. Who cares? But we should care. So some other thoughts to think of when we talk about consumption, right? So think of your closet and think of what's in there. We typically only wear 20% of what's in our wardrobe, especially now, right? We've got our favorites, we've got our comfortable items that we're, just we wash it, we wear it, we're going to school at home, we're working from home. Why not, right? So a lot of those items that we had in the closet are just never getting used. So, and what we do wear, we're only wearing an average of 7 times total. 7 times. So that's maybe once a month for 7 months, or, maybe 7 times in 1 month, and then you get rid of it. So it's not nearly as much as we were wearing them maybe 20, 30 years ago. And a third of us deem our clothes old after we wore it 3 times. And quite frankly, if we don't deem it old, it just looks old, right? If you've bought something from Old Navy, you probably understand what I'm saying, right? You've washed it once, the color faded, it's a little misshapen, doesn't quite look like it did when you bought it, right? So we're not even able to wear it more than 3 times or 7 times if we wanted to. So that goes into, when we talk about our natural fibers, our synthetic, something to think about when you buy that $5 t-shirt, it takes 2,720 liters of water to make 1 t-shirt, 1. So we drink that much water over a 3-year period. Makes 1 t-shirt. That's a lot, right? And so natural fibers are great. And yes, they're better for the environment, but think of the water consumption, right? So they're not a perfect solution either. Really the end of spoiler alert is just not buying so many items, right? And wearing them longer. So, but there's ways that we're going to get to that. So that's conventional cotton. If we use organic cotton, we can reduce our water consumption by about 91%. There's a reduced amount of energy. That reduces our potential for acid rain long-term, right? Because of the production, we're not using chemicals, we're not using, additional water when we're producing it as well. It's reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and then of course, reduced pollution in our waterways. So while we might have some more regulations here in the United States, most countries do not, or they might have them on paper, but they're easily circumvented because they want to make money, right? They want to employ people in their country. So they don't want to be, having to adhere to some of these regulations. So I'm going to show you a quick video. And this is from The True Cost. Livia Firth is Colin Firth's wife. She's a creative director for Eco Age. That's going to be on one of my sources that I would recommend if you're wanting to find out more information. Eco Age is really easy to follow on Instagram. They post a lot. But this is like a very short snippet of the true cost and kind of our consumption and what that means. Can you hear it?
A garment from a fast fashion brand usually lasts in a woman wardrobe for 5 weeks, an average of 5 weeks. We have young girls today on a Saturday afternoon that whether they are in Fifth Avenue in New York, or in Oxford Street in London, or in Via del Corso in Rome, that they just go and buy a dress for a party and then they discard it. Women my age, middle class women, they will go to a fast fashion brand to buy the latest look, coat or trousers, without even really caring for the garment that they're buying. And whether that garment lasts a season or more, they don't really think about it. So if you could actually stop for 1 minute and think, do I really need a pink coat? And will I wear it next year? Will I wear it in 10 years' time? You would be surprised how many times you think, oh, no. So why would you buy it? Because it's cheap.
Oops, let's see that. All right. So I'm assuming everybody heard that, right? I realized when I shared my screen, I didn't think I checked the box. Well, a pink coat, I would love a pink coat, and I actually would probably wear it for 5-10 years. But the reality is we don't, right? There's a hot color of the season. We wear it, we're done with it, we get rid of it because it costs us $40 or $50 or something like that. You know, we're not saving our money for a good amount of time. I remember in high school, I wanted, which is a now defunct store, a coat from the Limited. It was the place to shop, right? It was it. And I wanted this blue winter coat. And I worked at McDonald's, and my mom said, that's great, but you're going to buy that coat yourself. I worked for months to save up to buy it because the coat was like $300. So I saved, you know, at 16. And I remember that was a big deal when I bought that coat. And I tore it actually not too long after, and I was very heartbroken. But we used to do that, right? It wasn't available to buy things so cheaply. So consumption is one piece of it, right? We've created this fast fashion atmosphere that we are kind of programmed to be consumers, right? It makes us feel good to shop. It makes us, you know, look good when we go out, or, you know, it's kind of, it all goes back to that emotional tie for the most part. Yes, we have to wear clothes, but what are we buying, right? And how can we make better decisions? So even if it's cheap, we have to kind of think of what is this long-term impact of this $10 shirt, you know, or $15 pair of jeans, right? There's so many pieces that go into it. So sustainability issues in fashion, there's a lot of them. I just wanted to point out a few and kind of tie it back to, you know, COVID and social justice. But every day in Kanpur, which is India's leather capital, more than 50 million liters of toxic wastewater pour out of the local tanneries. There's a bad joke in the area that you can usually tell the hottest colors of fashion 18 months out by the color of the water. If the water's pink, you know, it's going to be pink or red, it's orange, it's blue, because it's all going out into the wastewaters. And even with regulations in place, unfortunately, it's just not adhered to. You know, it's not enforced, I should say. The textile industry is one of the most water wasting industries in China. There's about 2.5 billion gallons of water being wasted every year. And that's just the overflow. That's not even what's being used in production. So this graphic actually is probably better on my previous slide, but the average consumer bought 60% more clothing in 2014 than in 2000, but kept each garment half as long, right? So that kind of goes back to the consumption piece. But because of all of these conditions, you know, we're not paying living wages, we're not, you know, enforcing proper disposal and proper usage of water and chemicals, you know, we're able to buy things so much more cheaply that, like I said, it's just easy to get rid of it. So 85% of all textiles are trashed each year. They end up in a landfill or are incinerated. Burberry came under fire last year. They incinerate about $20 million worth of merchandise each year. So if it's damaged, instead of selling it and potentially, you know, damaging their brand, they'll burn it, they'll incinerate it. Companies like Target have done that, and a lot of luxury designers have as well. Once they were called out, they've now taken steps and, you know, committed to not doing that. I'd be okay with buying a Burberry bag if, you know, it was a little discounted if it had a tiny blemish, because quite frankly, most people aren't going to notice that. So, but it was just, they didn't want any association with poor, you know, quality craftsmanship with their brand. Same thing with Louis Vuitton and a lot of luxury brands out there. So if we wore an item of clothing for 9 months longer than we originally anticipate, we can reduce our carbon footprint by 30%. Doesn't cost us anything, saves us money actually, because we're buying quality goods, right? And we can wear them longer. We're reducing our carbon footprint. It's an easy step. USA now produces only 3% of their clothing, where prior, in the 1960s, they produced 95%. My family actually owned our own clothing factory. We produced baby clothing. So when I was a baby, I had all the baby clothing I could ever want. And unfortunately, when the 80s happened, and even further down the road, we closed in the 80s because we just couldn't compete with the global market anymore. But another piece that has really affected this is NAFTA. So when NAFTA was passed in 1993, obviously that made it much easier to get goods from Mexico that were more cheaply produced, right? Labor was less expensive. So that was one of the big catalysts to us being able to buy garments more cheaply. And then of course, obviously sourcing to other countries too, but NAFTA did have a big impact on that. On April 23rd in 2013 in Dhaka, Bangladesh, the Rana Plaza collapse happened, and that killed over 1,100 people working and injured over 2,500 people. That's considered one of the biggest, mishaps in fashion. And unfortunately, a lot of brands did not admit to selling their goods there. Some brands that were being produced in that particular factory were Children's Place, Benetton, Joe Fresh, Primark. Later, through subcontracting, we kind of found out that Walmart most likely produced products there too, and possibly Gap and some other brands as well. Shortly thereafter, they kept manufacturing, and there was another fire that killed, I think, over 100 people. And there's been several other incidents since that. If you go on Fashion Revolution every year on this date, like this week of April 23rd, they have like a Fashion Revolution week, and they're calling attention to what's happening in these labor practices that are going on still, not just in Bangladesh, but in other countries as well, and especially emerging countries that are having garments produced for fashion. So when we think of COVID right now, what's really kind of interesting, and a lot of brands are kind of taking a pause, is, supply chains halted. And if we are to resume production as usual, and as businesses are starting to, kind of creep back, this is a chance for us to say, hey, it's a fresh start. Let's do this the right way. Let's make this from start to finish as transparent as possible, right? And brands now are kind of, it's like a mea culpa, where they say, you know what, we messed up before. And I'm just blanking on the name. River Blue is a documentary on Amazon Prime. And Gerbeau, who is the creator of Gerbeau jeans and the acid wash jeans back in the day, he's in the movie and he says, I really messed up. That's terrible. It's a terrible production method. It really caused a lot of problems, but it was definitely very fashion forward. And now he's in the denim industry trying to make it better. So it's kind of interesting how, designers and brands are kind of taking this moment to say, hey, we're going to do better. So as we get into some other things, not just in garment production, but because of the factories closing, poverty is probably going to kill more than COVID-19. It's a result of COVID-19 because they are losing their jobs, right? And they're not able to produce the garments because brands canceled their orders, right? Once March hit, brands were like, oh my gosh, we're closing our stores. We're going to lose a ton of money every month. What are we going to do? We're going to cancel all of our orders. So that makes sense, right? Because they have to make a profit. So you see from this perspective, like they're trying to preserve themselves, but you have over 1 million garment workers in Bangladesh that have now lost their jobs, right? And they have no way, they're not getting a stimulus check, right? they were allowed to, I believe the government passed like a 1 month, like you can borrow from us your wages that you would earn for a month at 2% interest. So their wages are already so low, it's very difficult to pay that back retroactively once they start working again, right? So it's a vicious circle. We talk a lot about Bangladesh because it's the second largest garment exporter after China. So if you go to your closet right now, look at your tags, Bangladesh is probably on a majority of them. It's either Bangladesh or China. Now you see more of Cambodia, Egypt has popped up as well, Turkey, but they do have some of these countries have some higher wages. So it primarily still is Bangladesh for the majority of our clothing. For example, Primark was one of the biggest consumers of clothing from Bangladesh. They closed 376 stores, which is all of their stores in March. And they were closed for, I think they finally reopened all of their stores in July. So you figure end of March, April, May, June, potentially, they lost about $807 million a month. And they froze all their future orders. So what does that mean, right? So once they reopen, now they've got all this merchandise that is out of season, right? What do they do with that? They either discount it heavily and lose money, or some companies might incinerate it still, or they get rid of it in another way, in a factory outlet or something like that. But, you know, there's a lot of pieces. And when this first started happening, one thing we really talked about a lot in our classes is, you know, what about all this merchandise that's in transit? It's ready to go, right? And Urban Outfitters and other brands called and said, nope. Or this is another little tricky thing, is they would say, oh, right, that shade of red, not what I wanted. But it was a loophole for them to refuse the order, right? So there's a lot of articles about that happening too. It's like, oh no, we intended on paying them. It just wasn't the right thing. So, you know, there's some things kind of happening to kind of get these loopholes into still looking like they're paying the brand or paying the manufacturers, but, you know, the manufacturers were in the wrong, right? So again, to kind of put it in perspective, $2.8 billion worth of canceled orders since the beginning of COVID. That's from New York Times. And there's 3.5 million garment workers in Bangladesh, which we know over 1 million had lost their jobs like from the start. So why is this such a big deal, right? Because COVID not only affects what the orders, you know, how many orders are being processed, but traditionally, a lot of these garment workers live in dormitories. So when they're not working, there's now more people in a close environment, right? In the dormitory environment, and the spread of COVID can increase, right? Within everybody working and now living together. As the lockdown was happening, right? No wages equals starvation, right? Because they have no income, and the income that they had before was barely enough to get their basic needs met to start with. And now you have nothing, and there's no fallback to that. Some factories did stay open, and they were making medical supplies. You know, they were making face masks or, you know, any other type of medical supply that they could reasonably manufacture, but they were still under exploitive conditions. So they were still like, make it faster, because that demand is there, right? Everyone was scrambling to get these vital resources. And some brands were trying to do it the right way, right? Some of your luxury brands were, you know, that have a small like atelier who's, you know, making couture garments. We're doing that on a small scale, but these are big manufacturing, you know, facilities that are making that. And so they're living in these cramped quarters, and they're working in these conditions, which are still 15, 16 hours a day. And they don't know if they're really going to get paid. That was the other thing, right? So some were not getting paid money that they were retroactively owed. maybe they had produced the garment already. The companies decided to not, follow through. And there you go. And this is what I mentioned too about the Bangladesh assistance. So there was some assistance provided. However, it was just a loan. It was not a stimulus check or anything like that. So this is a website. And I know this looks like, oh my gosh, what is all this going on? But this is a way that you can actually find, if you're interested in this, which brands decided to not pay their workers. And this is updated pretty frequently. So this is the Workers' Right Consortium. And on the left, they have brands that are committed to pay in full. And on the right, they have companies that have committed to not, or not committed to pay in full, I should say. And they do update, you can see on the right, like they do make updates, like maybe if you click on the for more info, you get some additional information. For example, Kohl's was a really interesting one. I used to work for Kohl's, so I have a little, piece of my life committed to Kohl's at one point. But they canceled more than $1 billion worth of orders, but then paid $109 million in dividends to its shareholders. So shareholders were like, woohoo, this is great. And then you're like, oh, wait, what was that all about? Right? So and guess where they manufactured? Bangladesh. Another one was Levi's actually also offered financing for a lot of suppliers to get them through this time. So I thought that was pretty cool with them. And some of these brands were on the bad list to start, and then they got the negative press and they switched to the good list. So Target was one that was on the bad list to start, because I've been following this, and Fashion Revolution posts on Instagram quite frequently. And I have some saved, like screenshots saved from March, April, and a lot of those brands on the left-hand side were on the bad list, and they have converted over. TJ Maxx, and it's a shame because I love my Home Goods and HomeSense, but they did something similar to Kohl's. They paid, I think, over $400 million to their shareholders, $480 million in dividends and stock buybacks after they canceled a lot of their orders as well in Bangladesh, right? So Bangladesh has been hit really hard. And, they did some good things, like they're invested in their employees and things like that here. But when we take it back to the supply chain, there's some gaps there for sure. So I'll let you all look at that if you want to, but it's Workers' Rights Consortium. And like I said, ethical fashion shows a lot of this. So I have it's about a 2-minute video, and this is what CBS Sunday Morning did. And they talk a lot about Tory Burch, what she has done, and some other things happening because of COVID and how companies have kind of had to pivot more on the retail side as well. So I'm trying to give you a couple different perspectives in here.
The world of fashion is also celebrating a new season. Only it had to fashion some new ways of doing it, as Alina Cho shows us. Oh, lover, I've seen you long.
Not even a pandemic could stop New York Fashion Week. It did look different. This past week, the shows went on without the typical fanfare and with far fewer fans. Perhaps the biggest change came from some of the biggest designers, foregoing Fashion Week altogether.
We wanted to be respectful with what's happening with everything around us.
It isn't that designer Tory Burch and her team aren't working.
In different shapes, it's not the same.
But in March, the chief creative officer of her namesake brand shut down her office and 300 stores worldwide.
Quite honestly, we were fighting for every bit of business that we could get.
As the U.S. went on lockdown, clothing store sales plunged a record 79%. Retailers struggled to survive. Some didn't. With work from home the norm for many, Pajama sales spiked 133%. Slippers 75%. Hello sweatpants, goodbye jeans. Why would anyone want to buy a dress right now?
Our sport collection is performing really well, but so are our dresses. And people want to go and they want to feel that joy and optimism.
Of course, during a pandemic, fashion may not seem like a priority to some. It's actually a $400 billion a year industry, and one Birch says is too big to fail.
You got on the phone with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. What was your pitch? We need to save American jobs, and the fashion industry is close to 4 million jobs that were at risk. And we weren't being talked about like the airline industry. We needed to be addressed.
In the Depression, we saw a lot of people who couldn't afford to buy a new dress, and a lot of dressmakers went out of business. We may see something of the same thing now.
Valerie Steele, museum director at the Fashion Institute of Technology, says some of the best fashion has come out of tough times.
There was a lot of creative fashion that emerged in 1918, 1919 after the flu epidemic.
Like the fun flapper dresses of the roaring 20s and Christian Dior's iconic New Look, that cinched waist silhouette that became popular after World War II.
It wasn't really that new, but it had all been put on ice. And so people were just so excited about looking beautiful and feminine and romantic again.
What does the future of fashion look like to you?
Fashion will survive. The idea of dressing up, of making yourself look special, seems to be hardwired into human beings. That's the good news. The bad news is that it's going to be tough.
It's already been tough. One of the nation's oldest department stores, Lord & Taylor, announced it's closing all stores. At least 15 major apparel companies have filed for bankruptcy, including JCPenney, Brooks Brothers, and Neiman Marcus, a direct competitor to Saks Fifth Avenue. What's taken a hit during this period?
The evening gowns. Anything you'd wear to a formal event.
Mark Metrick, president and CEO of Saks, temporarily closed all 40 of his stores. Now, he says, business is sound.
People are buying handbags.
Absolutely.
People are buying pumps.
Yeah.
What?
Yes. Can you imagine? We are the comfort food of fashion. We are the splurge.
So these come in,
And they go.
As other menswear brands are folding, men's at Saks is performing unexpectedly well.
It's a Zoom call world and it's a more casual world. You knew you made it when you had the suit with the tie and the hat. This is in the 60s. Uniformity meant success. Now it's the opposite.
When I was talking to buyers, they're like, anything without a fitted waist is doing well.
The pandemic has prompted a homecoming of sorts for Tracy Reese and her sustainable brand, Hope for Flowers.
I'm questioning every piece. Like, would I wear this? Will my customer have a use for this?
In March, the veteran designer closed up shop in New York and moved back to her native Detroit. She now works from home.
It's been my plan for the past 2 years to make Detroit the home base for my business, and COVID really escalated those plans.
Another thing Reese hadn't planned on was a national reckoning on race, an issue that's deeply personal.
I was not a favorite of, certain fashion editors. It's more challenging to get financing. The list goes on and on.
Designer Aurora James is on the September cover of Vogue after challenging retailers to devote more shelf space to Black-owned businesses. The so-called 15% pledge went viral.
I think that Black vendors have historically been shut out of these opportunities. We're not stakeholders in this industry. This cannot just be a trend. And the fashion industry is notorious for cycling through trends.
Around the country, sales are slowly picking up pace as stores reopen, including Tory Burch.
how busy are the stores? It's down. I mean, it's probably down 45%. But what's interesting is that conversion is up.
So what does that mean?
They are shopping and they're buying more than ordinarily they would. So a lot of this is really nostalgic and reminds me a lot of my parents. My dad used to wear a lot of pinstripe suits.
Birch and part of her team are back in the office, finishing up a new collection that will debut virtually this fall, inspired by and created entirely on lockdown.
Do you envision a day where maybe this becomes a little more of the norm? I'm not sure who said it first, but you never waste a good crisis. I mean, there's so much darkness around with so many tough things. I think to have the ability to escape and dream is everything.
Okay, so it was a little longer than I anticipated, but I love the fact that there's so many, that this video really brings in so many different pieces of, you know, what COVID has kind of done, right, to the industry. And, you know, the Hope for Flowers brand, if you didn't catch the name, you should check it out. It's pretty cool. But the Fashion Week as well, New York Fashion Week brings about $20 million into the economy for New York during that time. So that's another hit, right? As most of these brands were doing things virtually, and obviously most people aren't traveling. So we've kind of, you know, it's another way that we're revisiting the times of before, you know, and how we used to do things. So they mentioned in the video different brands that have filed for bankruptcy. And this is just to kind of put this in perspective. And I was really upset about a few of these. You know, I worked for JCPenney's when I was in college, and I was actually an on-campus recruiter for them. And I worked for Loft for a few years in Jersey City and in King of Prussia. So there's a lot of these brands that, you know, I remember shopping at with my mom and my grandmother, you know, and going to Lord & Taylor. And, you know, these are iconic brands that, you know, may or may not survive. You know, just because they filed for bankruptcy doesn't mean they're completely done, but they definitely, you know, it's not a great outlook for a lot of these brands. And a lot of restaurants, you know, chains and things like that have also filed. So unfortunately, if they were kind of on the cusp, COVID kind of pushed them over, you know, into an area that they might not be able to recover from. So what can we do, right? I've given you all the gloom and doom that I can possibly give you for an hour on a Thursday afternoon, but there's some things that we can do, right? And buying local, right? And supporting your local businesses, obviously through COVID is huge, but just in general, right? Because usually your local businesses are really thoughtful in items that they're buying and where they're sourcing from, you know, versus some of these larger chains. Thrift shops and resale. So I've been using ThredUp a lot. I've actually sent 2 boxes to ThredUp, and apparently everybody in the country is also using ThredUp because something I sent in April still hasn't been processed. So they are so behind because they were probably shut down for a good amount as well. But ThredUp is a great way to buy, you know, resale online without even having to leave the house. You know, my mother always used to say, you know, one person's trash is another person's treasure. So there's a lot of things to do. Clothing swaps were extremely popular. We were actually trying to organize one through Fashion Club before COVID happened to do an on-campus clothing swap where students would bring in 10 items and get 10 tickets, and they could take 10 items with them. So we were trying to do that, and hopefully next year we'll be able to kind of get back into that. Renting your clothes, right? Rent the Runway, although we're not going to as many formal events right now, but Rent the Runway has other ways to purchase, you know, or I should say to rent Average Clothing. Ann Taylor Loft is doing rental programs. There's a lot of options. Stitch Fix is a way that you can buy clothing each month, but I believe they've now actually instituted a rental piece as well. Wash and dry less. So when we think of washing, especially if you have synthetic fibers, washing your synthetic fibers sends about 500,000 tons of microplastics into the water system, which is equivalent to 50 billion plastic bottles, or 31% of our plastic pollution in oceans. And that's just washing our clothes. So wash less, right? Nudie Jeans online, they will tell you, don't wash our jeans, right? Wash them maybe once every 5th wear or something like that. but try to extend and reduce the amount of times that you're washing your clothes. And of course, buying better, right? You know, it might be a little more out of pocket now, but in the long run, when it's lasting you, you know, 10, 20 wears, and you can mix and match and do different things with it. And, you know, buying those thoughtful pieces will inevitably work out in the long run. I always close, you know, when I do presentations with a few brands that are doing good things. And there's so many more. We just had in our global sourcing class, I think it was last week, I had the students kind of break out and they were looking for different brands and they find things that even I haven't heard of, which is exciting because I hope that means they're looking at that on a daily basis. But Rothy's shoes, I'm obsessed. I just talked about them for about 30 minutes in my morning class today, but Rothy's makes shoes out of recycled fishing nets, water bottles, sustainable rubber. I love them. I have a lot of their shoes. Allbirds is a great brand. Everyone I know that's ever had a pair of Allbirds is obsessed with them. They have running, casual shoes. They're a really great brand. Bottle Top, which makes handbags and accessories out of recycled bottle tops. It actually helps women in different countries that might not have an opportunity to have employment. They actually make the accessories. So that gives them an opportunity as well to earn a living. And they're pretty expensive, but I will tell you, I have one when I went to London for our study abroad trip that I bought. And every time I take it out, I get nonstop compliments. I mean, it doesn't matter where I'm at. I could be at a checkout line and someone, you know, sees it and they're like, where'd you get that? That's so cool. So it's just these kind of unique pieces too, that you can have and feel good about what you're doing. Adidas is a big brand. They're not perfect, but they do have good plans in place and they are trying to, as a big brand, make a difference. Everlane, which actually I think is just having a problem, but Everlane is usually a really good brand. They're having some issues, I think, with payment on some of their orders. Stella McCartney has been out there and she works with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is on my recommended sources, because she's really at the forefront of doing some really amazing things. And she talks about it. And one of her ad campaigns had models in landfills, right? To kind of call attention to, you know, what that actually looks like, not just in a picture. Patagonia is always doing, you know, some good things. Mara Hoffman, we actually did a field trip there a year and a half ago to their corporate office. They didn't start out as a sustainable company. They've since kind of transformed into one. And again, I mentioned ThreadUp and some of the other companies on here too. People Tree is really cool. They're UK based. I bought a shirt actually from the museum in London, which is a People Tree one when I was there for study abroad too. I made the best of my trip and all the places I wanted to go when I was there. So what can you do, or where can you find some of this additional information? True Cost Movie, it gets you. It's definitely calls attention to what's happening in the industry. We make all of our students in our program watch that either in their intro class or in one of my capstone classes. They're watching River Blue documentary, which is really about the denim industry and the waterways across the world and the impact that the industry has on that. EcoAge is just a great website. And like I mentioned, they post on Instagram along with Business of Fashion. They're talking about all pieces of the industry. So whether you really care a lot about fashion, doesn't really matter. They've got something for you because it will somehow impact you in the long run. Fashion Revolution, which is Fast Rev. Ethical Fashion is another good one. And I already mentioned the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They're really focused on the circular economy. So, you know, I produce this garment today. What happens to it long term? You know, where can it be circular in production? You know, where it actually, you know, can decompose and or recycled into something that's repurposed again. And Good On You .eco is another website that kind of talks about what brands are doing good things. So a garment worker from Bangladesh said, if you pay a little more, we can live a little better. And I think that's kind of a good piece to end on, because it really does make a huge difference in the long run. So, and that's it. So if you have questions, I think I just made my time. So yay. I always worry about that. But yeah, if there's any questions, feel free.
I took notes, Annmarie. It was so informative.
Oh, good.
Really great stuff. I'm just kind of curious about the eco labels. I know organic is, actually has some teeth, but I know the natural and like eco-friendly and all of that isn't really, there's no like legitimate definition of those things according to the FTC. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the labels and things. I mean, I researched it years ago, so I'm not quite up on it right now.
Yeah, so when I was actually at FIT, one thing that one of my professors told me that has just kind of stuck in my head is for the number of garments labeled organic cotton, there are not actually enough farms out there producing enough organic cotton to support those labels. So they're either mislabeled or there's a smaller percentage in that garment than what is, declared. Right. And unfortunately, like you said, with regulation, so I can have an organic cotton farm, but the minute it shares a processing plant with conventional cotton, it's not organic anymore, right? Those chemicals are in there. So there's, we've got a lot of work to do in a lot of these different pieces. And I'm always kind of skeptical, when H&M and these big companies have all of this organic cotton. I'm like, where's all that coming from?
Yeah.
Because you're producing a lot of these garments. And for example, I bought my daughter a couple of years ago some organic cotton dresses, and they were like 3 for $15. How are they producing organic cotton cheaply? So I read those labels with some caution sometimes. And I think it really makes sense to go and the brands that are transparent about it, I feel much safer, and where you're buying it. Cause I do think there's some real issues with labeling.
Yeah.
For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I'm not here. I think it's
take a picture of that.
I don't know if that's a question or if somebody is.
I'm sorry. I was trying to get like a volume down. Sorry. Yes, actually, I do have a question. So you kind of like touch a lot about a little bit of everything about fashion, which is kind of like sometimes like hard to follow. But my question would be actually kind of like the same question that you asked about like the organic cotton and how they can like try to get the I will say a productive material for the clothes. I actually remember that I watched a video about either, I think it was another plant, it wasn't cotton or probably plastic, I'm not sure, but it took longer to be turning into a clothes. I was wondering, is there like any other, instead of like for the fibers other than cotton, that people can use for the clothes so they could be more productive with it? And also, sorry, I have another one too. So you talk about like how like customer buy like so much clothes, but actually we don't actually end up wearing them, which actually also happened for me too. I love fashion, although I'm not a really I don't know a lot about it. But for example, like Fashion Week in New York, that's really a big event. I mean, we're not gonna get to like France and all the international event for like fashion week, it's so impressive.
Mhm.
But if for the consumer to kind of like end up buying more productively, and also the people who are in charge of designing the clothes and all these things, what would you say could like they do so they kind of like keep this balance? I don't know if I'm being clear enough.
Yeah, so, well, I'll answer your first question. So in regards to other fibers, hemp is actually one of the big ones. And now that more areas are able to legally farm hemp, you're going to see a big, I think, increase in that use in garments because it grows a lot faster. It's got a lot more uses than cotton. So there's definitely, hemp is a big one right now in the industry for sure. Tencel, which is regenerated wood pulp. It's a closed loop production. So Lenzing is the company that manufactures that. It's out of Austria. And it is regenerated wood fiber, but it's sustainable because for every tree they plant two, and then it's also because the production method is closed loop, everything is repurposed. So you're not losing any water, energy, and so forth. It's a really great way to produce that type of fiber. And you see that in a lot of athletic wear, a lot of big brands are using that now. So those are two fibers that I would say you're going to see a lot more of. And of course, recycled water bottles, everyone's doing that now. We were doing that pretty early on, but you see a lot more brands doing it now. Reprieve is a company in North Carolina that's producing for a lot of like Nike, Under Armour, these big brands, because it is moisture wicking. So it is good for a lot of athletic wear too, even though it's not natural, it is still synthetic. And then your other question was about like, what can brands do to be better?
Yeah, so like the designer, because I mean the design, they like create like new type of clothes like almost every month. So how can we like keep up with the
Yeah, so we went from like getting clothes twice a year to almost 20 times a year.
Yeah.
And brands are having a hard time keeping up with that. So I think it was Gucci that has now said, we're scaling back. We're going back to twice a year. We're not doing this anymore. You know, COVID has kind of started them in thinking this hamster wheel needs to stop. You know, it's like faster, faster, faster. And if you watch the McQueen documentary, which is actually very sad, but it does talk about the fact that he's on this. And same thing, there's a documentary on Moschino, and you know, he's got his own brand, plus Jeremy Scott working with Moschino, and he's nonstop. And he's like, I'm here, I'm there, I'm doing this brand, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And we all got to kind of just take a step back. So I think you are going to see some more brands starting with that, because it just doesn't make sense. You know, it's just, there's a bottom. They call fast fashion the race to the bottom, right? At some point you can't make it cheaper, you can't make it better. And what's going to happen? Like something's going to fall out. And this might be the fallout. This might be the point where I think a lot of brands, if they're smart, they can take this moment and shift it to potentially work out better for them.
So would you say like during this period, and then also with COVID, this is a crisis for fashion, I would say?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because like I mentioned, it's not just, you know, we're not buying things, but it's these, you know, social justice and these lifelong effects it's going to have on people that this is their livelihood, is producing garments for this industry, which is, you know, 60 to 70 million people working in this industry. It's got to change.
I just wanted to add too, you know, presentations like this, you know, they can impact our decision as consumers. So, you know, we play a part in buying all the fast fashion, you know, and it's a cycle. So if we're, you know, saying to ourselves, and I'm only going to buy like 5 pieces a year or something like that. And I'm going to make sure they come from these types of, you know, whatever the business list that you showed us, they meet these ethical criteria. So I really am so happy that you presented us with all this information, because, you know, we as the consumer, they're not going to make stuff if we're not buying it, you know? So that's just, I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, I mean, the consumer has ultimate power. I mean, they can make whatever they want, but if we don't want to buy it, they'll figure it out and they'll change.
Yeah,
eventually.
exactly.
Any other questions? Those are great questions. Well, thank you all so much. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me ramble about something I love talking about.
I just want to say, for the students who are on the call, we have a wonderful program that is part of our Global Citizenship Project called the Global Citizenship Distinction Initiative, and it allows you to accumulate points for attending events like this, taking courses that are globally enhanced, and Professor Hughes has some of her courses are globally enhanced. It allows you to graduate with Global Citizenship Distinction. Your name is in the commencement program. We give you a lovely medallion to wear. And it's just something, you know, an additional piece to add to your resume. And it is a program that is open to students in any major without regard to grade point average. So it's, and we try to make it truly accessible for anyone. So if anyone is interested in that, just send us an email at international@brookdalecc.edu. It's international@brookdalecc.edu, and we'll put you in touch with the faculty coordinator for that program. And also, Professor Hughes mentioned study abroad. Well, study abroad will be coming back once it's safe to do so. And for those of you who are just starting in the fashion merchandising program, education abroad is now embedded into the curriculum, so that there will be opportunities for students in future years to include study abroad into your studies, into your academic plan. So just keep that thought in there as well. And I want to thank you for sharing what you did. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did as well. Yes, type fun.
Hi. Sorry. So I really take like fashion as a hobby, and I'm really trying to learn more. So based on that, I really love the presentation, and I would really love, like, I'm really busy. I can actually like go to those meetings a lot, but I would really love if I can like maybe follow, if you like have any I don't know the person name who presented today, but maybe she has like a social media or like a website, then you can like go and then see the updates on the fashion industry.
Yeah, we have an Instagram page. It's I'll type it in real quick. It's at Brookdale Fashion.
Oh, good.
And that's our Instagram. So we do try to update it. And then of course, any questions that you might have about classes or, anything like that. This is my email, and, feel free to email me if there's, hey, I'd like to take this fashion class. I'm not really sure. Even if it's an elective, we have a lot of students that take our Fashion 121 course that are not majors. They take it as one of their electives. So, and oddly enough, we've had a few that have then subsequently changed their major. So you never know, right? It might be something, and we have 2 certificate options. So even if you want to pursue something else, if you want to pursue a business degree and maybe, take one of the fashion certification routes as well, you could do that. So there's a lot of options.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And if anyone doesn't know how to access the chat, just unmute yourself. We put all the information is in the chat, the email for the International Center and Professor Hughes's information as well. You guys are Zoom pros.
Yeah. Well, and I was just going to mention a few names I recognize that are in my global sourcing and sustainability course. And that is one of the courses that Jan was referring to. So you actually do have one of those courses already or are in process.
So you've already earned some points for the global
Right.
citizenship distinction if you choose to participate in that program.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.